Thank you. I wanted to take, David and I are both political scientists. I wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about sort of a political scientist point of view. The first thing is, I'm astounded, just as we were saying, I'm astounded by how quickly Trump and his allies have taken over the American government. Second, I'm by no means sure of this, but I worry that the damage is already irrevocable.
Yeah, I understand.
That our political system has been fundamentally revolutionized for good. Second, this is a much more academic point, but I think that when we try to comprehend what is happening, we tend to turn to comparisons with Germany and with Hitler. Of course, we think of Hitler and we think of the Holocaust, killing 6 million Jews and others. I don't think that's a relevant example for us. Somebody earlier on our group here said it's like the first steps of Hitler, and of course there are some similarities, but basically it's a different situation. Hitler is not the relevant advancer, neither is Stalin in Russia. Actually, Italy, and to an even greater extent, Japan, which is what I study, but I won't go into, are much more relevant examples of how a government could be taken over. And I point out that it took a world war to bring down Germany and Japan. And it wasn't any opposition from within, so that's not a particularly hopeful remark. I just had this idea yesterday. I don't want to develop it particularly or go any further, but I thought I would mention it. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for sharing that. And it is very much akin to what I want to talk about today. And why don't I go ahead and jump in
Sure.
and I'm going to say a couple different things, and I'm not entirely mind made up about what to think about the first now almost 2 weeks of the Trump administration. I think in part because, of course, politics occurs in a realm of uncertainty and contingency, unintended consequences. And there's just an awful lot that this administration is doing that could fail remarkably and generate a huge backlash to it. And that the result might be that the effort to not just, and the way I put this right a couple weeks ago when I spoke with you about the collision between climate change and regime change, and then I tried to justify the use of that term regime change to suggest that Donald Trump isn't just trying to have another presidential administration with its own priorities. He's literally trying to change the structure that organizes power in the United States, in part because it would, if successful, if he can vastly expand the role of the president and executive power, bypass Congress, and become more of an autocrat in the way that John suggested. I would add Spain under Franco to the list of regimes that became very autocratic and by the way, as a result, very illiberal, right? You know, that went after their minorities, went after their opposition, went after their dissidents, went after pluralism in their civil society, went after the universities and the press. The Trump is attracted to that conception of politics, and he's attracted to it in part because he views power as the ultimate metric of success, right? And I think that's been true of him in his business career as well as his political career. And he believes, and I believe there's an insight here, that power feeds power, that at a certain point, if other powerful people are forced to bend the knee to you, people understand that as an exercise of dominance, and then they're less emboldened to resist you, more intimidated, right? And so there's the match between Donald Trump's implicit worldview and personality and what he's doing in our government and what we recognize other autocrats have tried to do. And I guess I would add Stalin now to the list, right? Non-genocidal, although very destructive regimes. And it may be the historians debate about this, that Stalin actually killed more people internally, more democide than even Hitler. Obviously, he didn't target a religious minority for liquidation as an effort to completely destroy that group, but nevertheless, a lot of violence done to his internal population. Now, I think that this is entirely in keeping with an idea that Trump identifies with Viktor Orban and maybe Steve Bannon, right? Which is that the 21st century is just moving too fast. And the forces that are interfering with our ability to protect American society, American well-being, the American way of life as Donald Trump understands it, are in need of managing by rapid strength, energy, decisiveness, and that the kind of government we have is deliberately engineered not to enable that. And so I've argued with you before the idea that Bruce Ackerman of Yale has developed, that America doesn't really have a single constitution, that it has three constitutions, even though there's only one document in the Smithsonian. And that is because at some point when you radically reinterpret what was originally a slave charter to be an abolitionist document, or what was originally a system of government designed to have a very weak federal government and have a lot of the sovereignty retained by the states, to have a much more empowered federal or central government, you end up with a fundamentally different regime, even though there's apparent continuity in the formal description of the legal structure, right? And so is there a fourth regime transition occurring under Donald Trump? And is that what the American people want? And I think that, frankly, until we answer the second question, we won't know the answer to the first question. I want you to engage what I think of as a really painful thought experiment, a hypothetical. Imagine that 25, 30, 40 years ago from now, Donald Trump is regarded as the FDR of the Republican Party, right? As the decisive leader who gave that party dominance in American politics and set our country on a different course. And maybe a lot of people think it's actually a better course, right? And I do think that we have to recognize, especially because we live in an era of new media technology, and our new media seem to be so powerful to shape our sense of reality, right? We've looked at some of the evidence for the way in which economic perceptions seem to turn on a dime when a new president comes into power. Perceptions of your own economic well-being, right? As well as perceptions of the economy as a whole. And this happens more strongly. I'm not sure who's helping you, Flossie, but I keep muting you because you guys are talking. I hope you don't mind, but I'm just trying to keep the noise from echoing through the Zoom system. So the idea that we live in a new media environment, that this new media environment is shaping people's perceptions of reality, that maybe even if Donald Trump ends up doing some stuff that is horribly destructive to the economy, people will still credit him and still think that he is the appropriate leader and a success. I don't think we can entirely dismiss that reality, or that, I'm sorry, that possibility that that could be our future reality, right? And so, having said all of that, I come back to the theme that history is not determined, right? And the success of Donald Trump's presidency will not only be determined by what happens in the economy, but also by what happens in our polity and our culture and our willingness to not just stand up to, protest, resist, try to impede what we consider to be unjust, immoral, unconstitutional actions when they are taken. And I think, right, we started the conversation today talking about how little attention the purging of the FBI got in the mainstream media. We're going to have to figure out not only what matters most to us, but also which issues have the greatest chance of reaching those that we don't agree with and saying to them, look, you may support Donald Trump. We may not see eye to eye in terms of our opinions on this president, our partisanship, our politics, but do we still have a core shared political morality, some sense of what is just and what is unjust? And if or when Donald Trump crosses those lines, right? Are we able to say to our fellow citizens, please don't abandon the core commitments that make America America? And one of those commitments, by the way, is the rule of law. And if this administration, as it appears to be, is increasingly hostile to, trying to tear down the guardrails that prevent the abuse of the considerable power of the presidency, that's not in our long-term interest. That makes us less of a democracy, that makes us less secure, that opens the door for despotism. And by the way, you may like what he's doing with that power right now, but recognize it becomes unpredictable. And this is a man who doesn't seem to have a stable ideology, stable morality, stable commitments. You know, look at what's happening with TikTok, the peculiar about face, right? Just let's try to get our shared principles straight, and let's stand up for those principles. And if we are able to do that, if we are able to successfully not just resist, but rebuild some sense of shared political morality, and then maybe rebuild some capacity in civil society to not have to rely simply on bullies, strongmen, people who claim to act energetically on our behalf. And I understand the appetite for that, and the way in which, in light of the torpor of Joe Biden, the remarkable legislative success in his first 2 years, and total and utter failure to communicate why that success mattered, and frankly, a growing impression that nobody was really in charge, that nobody in the White House really was able to manage our affairs in ways that allowed us to feel, yes, there's somebody in the most important office in the United States who is acting on behalf of the people of the United States. And I think we have to not lose track of that symbolic dimension of the presidency. This is a person who, among other things, is supposed to be our leader. Joe Biden did not appear to be up to the job for his last, and then I'm not sure quite where I draw the line. Year and a half, 2 years, right? And the success of Donald Trump in his first almost 2 weeks in office is to say, I'm in charge. I'm energetic. I'm strong. We've been at drift, and that's stopping, right? And so there's an opening here for Donald Trump to really, in the way that I think John has described, I've described, others have spent a lot of time describing, really alter the very structure of our government in a way that would be very destructive. And I think that that is a Faustian bargain. Yes, we want strength. Yes, we want energy. But we also want restraint. We also want to be a constitutional democracy governed by the rule of law. And we need to reassert those principles in ways that reach the people who are impressed with Donald Trump's energy, decisiveness, strength, and see it as a important break with what was preceding him, which was drift, right? And so I do think that this is a tricky time in ways that John's comments pointed us to. Let me get into then what I have to speak with you about today. I've got a title for you, which may appear to be a little bit lighter than what I've just been saying to you. I decided to try to have a little bit of fun with this today. Not that these are necessarily fun times or fun topics. And so in the way that I think John has emphasized, I'm trying to emphasize, others are emphasizing, I think it's right to see, right, what the image here of now Donald Trump at the resolute desk in the White House with stacks of binders containing executive orders, using his big pen to put his gaudy signature to yet another order that may do not just dramatic policy change, but dramatic structural change to the nature of American government, that this is a radically transformative agenda. But please note that it is also a radically transformative agenda that is based on an incredibly narrow electoral victory, right? We've emphasized this together. 250,000 votes go differently, and Kamala Harris is the next president of the United States. That in more than half of the battleground states, the Democrats won the Senate race, right? And that means, obviously, that the people of those states did not just want Donald Trump to be able to do whatever he wanted to do. They split their tickets and, in a sense, elected somebody to maybe check Donald Trump a little bit. That when we go issue by issue, it does not appear that the American people, the majority of people who voted for Donald Trump did so because they embraced every element of his rhetoric and his agenda, but because they thought that he was more likely to increase wages, decrease prices, and be an effective president, right? And given what he's doing, the sheer rapidity and radicalness with which he is trying to remake policy regimes, but also the power structure, the legal structure of the United States, this is a incredibly audacious move to try to say, right, I have been elected to fundamentally change the structure of the United States. And please note, in addition to that, Donald Trump does not have the appetite for it, the focus, the background, the maybe intellect. I'm not quite sure how to put it, but he just doesn't seem to be interested in a lot of policy details, right? Or economic theory or international relations, right? There's the famous incident in which when he went to the NATO summit, world leaders were told, please keep your comments to 2 or 3 minutes because that's about as long as Donald Trump really has patience for listening to somebody tell him stuff that he's not interested in. And so the idea that maybe a fair bit of the various orders coming out of the White House right now are grounded in his instinct, his hunches, his desire to control the narrative and attract attention, to project strength, and to project a kind of masculine energy, to also say to the American people, right, that the direction that the Democrats wanted us to move in, of being a more inclusive, multiracial, post-traditional society, that's over. And we're going to try to resurrect an earlier conception of America as fundamentally European, as fundamentally Christian, as fundamentally traditional. And it's just not clear to me that he really understands what the effects of pursuing this agenda will be, what the risks associated with this agenda are. The tariffs announced this morning, we don't have enough. I guess they were announced yesterday. They go into effect this morning if right, they can actually do this. We have not enough information to know what they're going to be on and how systematic their impact is going to be, whether or not this is more bully and bluster than actual policy, whether he's going to demand some sort of concessions from Mexico and Canada and then claim victory, even if those concessions are in fact things that they were already doing. It might be this is all bluster, in other words. But having said that, if we really impose sweeping tariffs of 25% on our two largest trading partners, our two closest neighbors, the economic consequences could be catastrophic, right? 20% increases in prices, millions of jobs lost. And so when I say, what could possibly go wrong? My suggestion is that there are two scenarios here. One of them is that Donald Trump succeeds, and what goes wrong is that a 200+ year experiment in the rule of law and constitutional democracy, an experiment that, right, has more often failed than succeeded, that needed constant work to realize, better realize its promise, right? And the history of slavery and racism and disenfranchisement and discrimination on the basis of gender and sex and race. You know, we could keep going about the multiple ways in which we've failed to live up to that promise, but it's also the case that I think if you look at it from the long term, the longue durée perspective, we have slowly but surely progressed. Will we now abandon that experiment altogether? Or will we figure out how to reach out to our fellow citizens and say, this experiment is incomplete, it needs perfecting, it needs improving, but it should not be abandoned. So one thing that could go wrong is that Donald Trump could succeed and we could end up with a more autocratic government, and our commitment to the rule of law, to the rights of minorities, to internal pluralism, to a vital civil society could be in jeopardy. The other thing that could go wrong, and here, in a sense, this is not a happy scenario, but it's maybe not as unhappy a scenario as the first scenario, is that a lot of these policies could backfire, could come back to bite us. And when I say us, I mean me and you. I mean the people of our society. If inflation spikes and unemployment goes way up because of tariffs, if right, we begin to experience more rapid climate change and environmental degradation because of the firing of the advisory boards to the EPA right when the 2009 endangerment finding is being reconsidered. I'll go into the details there, I promise, right? And if as a result, right, the fossil fuel industry is essentially deregulated, we will be in harm's way. So if it bites us, can we make it bite him? Can we make Donald Trump pay the cost? Can we penetrate the right-wing media system echo chamber that says basically that this man can do no wrong and anything that goes wrong on his watch is the fault of the deep state, the liberal elite, or is just manufactured fake news, don't pay any attention to it. That's going to take strategy. That's going to take organization. That's going to take some sympathy for the reasons that many of our fellow citizens are actually giving Donald Trump a chance, are actually saying to themselves, maybe this man is doing what needs to be done for our society. And so there's going to have to be really hard work in figuring out how to present our objections to what he's doing in ways that don't just resonate with and appeal to the people who are already convinced that this man is an abomination, is someone who's convicted of a bunch of felonies, is right liable for sexual harassment, and is now at it again, abusing his power and doing terrible things. If all we do is talk to our side, we're not going to get very far. We have to figure out how to reach out to those who support Donald Trump or who are at least open to the idea that maybe what he will do will be successful, and convince them that there are at least aspects of this effort to restructure American government that are antithetical to our core commitments and that we need to resist. All right, so having said all of that, I'm going to start with Alexis de Tocqueville today. And I'm going to also, in addition to putting right de Tocqueville, who wrote Democracy in America, and I'm quoting from Democracy in America on the slide, an image on the board. And this is an image of the inauguration and who was in the front row, front and center, right? And I imagine you recognize Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and that's Sundar Pichai, the head of Google, right, the CEO of Google, and of course, Elon Musk, right? And please note that what that means, among other things, is that Ron DeSantis was in the overflow room, the governor of Texas, in Greg Abbott in the overflow room, right? That there was a clear symbolic politics to who got to share the stage with Donald Trump during his inauguration, who got to, in particular, have front row seats and the visibility that comes with being in the front row during a presidential inauguration. And it was not the political elite. It was not the people who, frankly, supported Donald Trump in his first run for the presidency, and people like Jeff Bezos, even in his second run for the presidency, were very much opposed to him, right? And yet, I want to suggest that this is the new oligarchy, but also a particular kind of oligarchy, the media elite, the new media elite, right? And that there's an effort here to, if you will, symbolize the cultural shift that we're in the middle of, right? It is the titans of new technology, and in particular new media technology, whether it's Facebook and Meta, or Amazon and Google, or Tesla and X, who are the power players that Donald Trump is trying to both put in his corner and give some prominence to. Now, with that background, let me quote from Tocqueville, and Tocqueville has a poetic metaphor to express the primacy of culture over institutional politics, and I want to suggest this has some contemporary relevance. And here's the quote: "Sometimes after 1,000 efforts, a lawgiver succeeds in exercising some indirect influence over the destiny of nations, and then his genius is praised, whereas it is often the geographic position of the country over which he has no influence, right? What's its economy going to be like thanks to its natural resources? Um, a social state which has been created without his aid. How equal or unequal is the society? Mores and ideas whose origin he does not know. I think in our terms, political culture or in civil culture, and a point of departure, by which Tocqueville means a history, of which he is unaware, that give to society impetuses of irresistible force against which he struggles in vain, and which sweep him to along. A lawgiver is like a man steering his route over the sea. He too can control the ship that bears him, but he cannot change its structure, create winds, or prevent the oceans stirring beneath him, right? And I think this is the way of Tocqueville saying, be careful of overemphasizing the particular person in power, the particular laws and policies they're making. What matters more is the big shifts in culture, the deep forces of people's received ways of thinking, their deep dispositions. And I think part of what Donald Trump recognizes is that the United States is in the middle of a major cultural shift, right? That cultural shift is symbolized and represented by the titans of the attention economy. Um, but it is also changing our understanding of our political and social reality, shaping it. And that Donald Trump grasps that in these circumstances, maybe there's an opening for autocracy in the United States. And frankly, I suppose you may have seen very recent news. Ken Martin is the new leader of the DNC, right? A very old school Democrat. The Democrats are in trouble. The opposition to Donald Trump is going to be really struggling to generate effective resistance if it continues assuming that everything is the way it was when Barack Obama was elected or when Bill Clinton was elected, that there's a deep shift occurring in our culture, in our society, in our media, in our technology. And Donald Trump intuitively better understands this, understands that many people find this to be disorienting. There are deep shifts happening in our social life and culture, right? The fact that we are dealing with millions of migrants in our midst who were not here before compounds and symbolizes the fact that we're rapidly becoming a multiracial democracy. The idea that religion no longer has the hold on a rising younger generation who sees gender as perhaps a choice or even a performance and not a biological fact. These are things that many people find to be deeply challenging, and they want a leader who helps them to navigate and perhaps imposes his will on this new and threatening world. Donald Trump seems to understand that better than his opposition does. The opposition needs to quickly, I think, turn the corner. And to be as clear as possible, it does seem to me that some of the Democrats, some of the opposition, better understand this than others, but they're frankly few and far between. All right, so with that in mind, I'm going to do a little bit more work of trying to separate wheat from chaff in terms of the first not quite 2 weeks of the Trump administration. And there is a strategy that Donald Trump is using. I think I referred to this last week as a flood the zone strategy. Just try to do so much so quickly that nobody really knows what to pay attention to, that we are just stunned and intimidated, that our capacity to resist is overwhelmed, and the result is that we're deer in the headlights just watching while this onslaught unfolds, right? And so the first perhaps approach to resisting this is just to make sense of it, to sort it out, to say, actually, although there are more executive actions than have ever been used in a modern presidency, there's some structure underlying this. There's some clear priorities emerging. There's some things that Donald Trump is trying to do. And once we have the organizing categories, then we can begin to think about which of those categories are the ones that we care most deeply about and we want to direct our attention to. We're not going to try to pay attention to every one of the executive actions because it would be overwhelming and it would deprive us of the space, the time, the energy we need to organize ourselves. So how do we make sense of this new administration and all of its action? It is clearly trying to project that it is energetic and strong. It is clearly actually better organized than the first Trump administration or than the last couple of years of the Biden administration. And it is clearly also uninhibited. And so I'm borrowing now from Ezra Klein, who I think has some very telling and insightful analysis of this, that Donald Trump has always been disinhibited. He's always done things that nobody else would do because he thinks it's in his interest and because he can get away with it. And now, by the way, he's survived an assassin's bullet. He has been not only indicted, but convicted, held liable for sexual aggression, and by the way, reelected, right? And there's got to be a sense, this man, right, of historical destiny. And I'm suggesting that he understands the cultural moment much better than his opponents, and that he really sees an opportunity to do more or less whatever the hell he wants to do, right? And that means that he is going to be much more autocratic in his second term than he was in his first term. And I do think he is, among other things, trying to tear down the structures that resisted his imposition of his will as president in his first term. He's trying to remove the checks, the balances, the guardrails, the norms that prevent him from using autocratic power. And that he may be his own worst enemy. He may end up doing stuff that is going to be deeply damaging to the country and therefore damaging to his popularity, his standing, his success. But I do think we have to at least consider the possibility that his fusillade of executive action is going to be seen as successful by his supporters, his followers, and maybe even a majority of Americans. So with that in mind, priority number one, resisting the diversification of America by redefining who is and isn't fully included, and also by trying to arrest the momentum in the direction of a post-traditional culture. We've talked about this before, that this is part of the appeal of autocrats and authoritarians in the 21st century, the sense that we need a strong leader in disorienting and rapidly evolving times, that we are a nation with a long history of European or white dominance, right? We are a country with a long history of Christian cultural hegemony. And that both of those things seem to be at risk, right? If you look at it from a perspective that worries, that is the anchor, the structure that has sustained American success politically, culturally, economically for the last couple hundred years. And as it gives way, then the cultural prerequisites for American success are also being challenged. And that seems to be Donald Trump's worldview. It seems to be popular with a substantial portion of Americans. And Donald Trump is figuring out how to use executive power to signal to the country and the world this fight isn't over. And in so doing, I want to say, in many ways, he's fighting against demographic trends and cultural developments that are almost irresistible. But having said that, it may also be that the fight is more important than the outcome or the victory. Take, for instance, the fact that the federal government has now been directed to withhold birthright citizenship from those who, according to constitutional law, seem to be entitled to it, right? And the provision of the 14th Amendment that says people born in this country are entitled to citizenship of this country has been broadly interpreted by the Supreme Court up until this point as meaning anyone born in the country. That seems to be the plain language of the text. And Donald Trump, with his executive order, is trying to suggest, on the one hand, that that system is being abused, that there are people who are coming to this country to have anchor babies, who are engaged in citizenship tourism, right? Just be here at the moment at which your child is born, and then your child has citizenship. That there are people who are abusing the idea of asylum or refugee status in order to get here, and then attempting to have children while they're here to make sure that their children have citizenship, or who are here on student visas. And he has directed his government to withhold, right, social security numbers and the other ways in which our government registers citizenship for those people born in the country, for everyone born in the country, right? And we will see. It's going to be litigated. Already, there's an injunction in place in which the judge indicated profound skepticism to the idea that this is legal or constitutional. But having said that, I think you look at the history of abortion politics in this country, in which, right, the effort to deny, to restrict access to abortion was such a powerful political force on the right, despite repeated losses in the Supreme Court and the judicial system, and that in a sense, the loss energized the movement, right? And that part of the point here is to say, well, if we lose in this round, that means you need to continue to support the MAGA movement, because we need to continue to remake the federal judiciary so that they reinterpret the Constitution so that the 14th Amendment does not allow the white majority of Americans to be diluted, or does not allow people to come here and invade our country, right? And again, I think that this is based on a poor understanding of reality. The elements of the understanding of reality that it seemed to me falsify the reality of the situation. One of them is that it is immigration that is changing the demographics of our country. It's not. It's rates of fertility, rates of birth, right? White Americans are having non-replacement rate birth rates. People of color, especially Latinos, who are citizens, are having children at a more rapid pace, right? And the result is that our demographics are shifting, and that's not because of migration. That's because of birth rates, right? And you add to that, by the way, the reason that our wages are stagnating, that our capacity to afford the standard of living we want is eluding us, right? That 80% of Americans can't buy a home who don't already own a home or have family members who are willing to loan them the money is not because migrants are out competing us on the real estate market. Far from it. They're actually contributing to the construction industry and the building of homes. They're contributing trillions of dollars to our economy, bringing wages down, increasing, therefore, our overall productivity. And yes, some of this is ambiguous, right? We want wages to go up, and there are sectors in which they're driving wages down. But please note, we also don't want inflation. I think it is at this point logistically and legally impossible for the Trump administration to actually deport 10 million people. And I certainly hope I'm right about that. But everything I see indicates that we don't have literally the physical resources to be able to do this. Yes, we can send 30,000 people to Guantanamo Bay and use that as an export holding center, a deportation holding center. But having said that, 30,000 does not get you up to 10 million. Yes, we can quadruple the rate of deportation under Joe Biden, get it up to 1,000 people a day, maybe even more than that. But you do the math. 1,000 people a day for 4 years does not get you to 10 million, right? But having said that, the idea that we can create a climate of fear and intimidation in which people don't feel that they can go to work, can go to the church, can go to the hospital, can send their kids to school, may change the attractiveness of coming to this country. And frankly, given the demographic trends, given the essential and valuable work that migrants do for our labor, for our workforce and our economy, given the spirit of this country enshrined in the poem on the Statue of Liberty, right? Send us your huddled masses. The idea that we would go from being a place that has been welcoming to a place that is deeply suspicious and hostile, tries to make people live in fear, is a fundamental alteration to our implicit social compact. And I do think that this is, in essence, the first priority of the Trump administration: redefine who belongs here, who should feel comfortable here. And I would just point out to you very quickly, right, under the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, African Americans had the right to equal citizenship beginning in the 1860s, right? And yet it took the better part of a century for that right to actually become actionable and meaningful for African Americans living in the Jim Crow South. That the fact is that when we start making some people feel that they are second-class citizens, that they don't belong, that they don't have the full rights and inclusion, we empower others to intimidate them, to do violence against them, to disregard their rights. And very often we're successful at intimidating and cowing and making people not assert their rights, their inclusion, their equality. And again, I think this is the hope of this administration, part of the effort to punish the people who dared to stand up to Donald Trump, part of the effort to free the January 6th, quote, hostages, right? The people who've been convicted of doing violence against police officers, is to send a message. Under this administration, there will be zero tolerance for people who resist its actions. There will be an effort to make people who resist suffer, and there will be the potential to do vigilante violence with impunity. I think we have to take this seriously as a top priority of this administration. I won't go through all of the details here, but revoking Lyndon Baines Johnson's order barring discrimination in federal contracting, right? An order that was respected by presidents named Reagan and Bush and Trump, right? And saying, guess what? We're no longer going to require, right, that the contractors to the federal government not discriminate, hire a diverse labor force. Again, it's a way of signaling, right? The idea that we're eliminating DEI programs, that maybe we're freezing funding to all kinds of programs across the country because, quote, they do DEI, right? And that we're not going to have anything but two genders and your gender is going to have to be what it was at conception. It's not even meaningful, but having said that, its message is clear. And I do think, again, writing now in the New Yorker, that suggests, right, part of the reason to play the card, the reason there was a plane crash, a terrible, tragic plane crash in Washington, D.C. a couple days ago, must be because of the DEI initiatives that the Federal Aviation Authority put in place. This is to suggest that the federal government, its staff, its civil service is not competent, is not valuable, but instead is captured by the liberal elite who've set the country down this path to be too diverse, too untraditional, too atheistic, agonistic, open to too much diversity, not just racially, but in terms of gender and culture. And we are going to stop this, and we're going to have no restraint in our effort to stop this. We will purge the FBI. We will use the FBI officials. I wonder what they were doing 2 weeks ago, but this week, they're doing deportation, right? Whatever their other priorities were, drop that and get those migrants out of our country. This is part of what I think is the central priority, the central appeal of Donald Trump to his core followers. And clearly, this is where he's emphasizing his priorities in his first weeks in office. I have on the slide here a diagram that shows you the number of executive orders issued in the first 10 days of Donald Trump's presidency. And please note that he's already issued more orders in the first day than any president going back to Truman, right? That he is already issuing more orders in the first 10 days than any president other than Biden or Truman issued in 10 times as long in their first 100 days. Please note that Truman, of course, was a wartime president, that Biden used executive action to undo the extensive executive action of Trump's first term. This is a different approach to governance, right? And so I think that's one of the things we should be noticing as a priority. But the second priority I'm going to point to is to transform the energy and tech sectors. And to do this in order to enrich the people who back Donald Trump or who he hopes will have his back, maybe to enrich other Americans. If this is, right, on the one hand, what made us so powerful in the past, the fact that we just drilled and used all the energy sources that we had, all the natural resources, let's keep doing that. To hell with the environmental qualms about doing that. But also the idea to assert future economic dominance, right? We have to embrace artificial intelligence and crypto. And I want to suggest very quickly, again, that this may be disastrous in the long term, right? And I take seriously the threat of climate change. To put this in perspective, the amount of carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere right now, the last time the planet reached that level of carbon dioxide was during a period that geologists refer to as, let me see if I can do it, the Paleocene, Eocene thermal maximum. And at that point in our history, the planet's history, we estimate that the temperature was about 5 degrees Celsius, about 15 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than it is now. That means there was no ice on the surface of the planet. There weren't polar caps. There was not permafrost or tundra in Siberia or Alaska or northern Canada. There wasn't ice sheets in Greenland and Iceland. It was a planet where the oceans were 20 meters, 50 feet higher than they are today, where North America and Europe were substantially smaller than they are today because the rising oceans diminished the size of the continent that was above the surface of the ocean. And by the way, that won't happen for hundreds of years. If it does happen, it will likely take tens of thousands of years for it to be undone by natural processes unless we figure out a technology we haven't mastered yet. But having said that, I think we should be honest about the fact that it's not probably going to happen in the next 4 years. And so Donald Trump, frankly, I don't think gives a damn about anything that doesn't affect him, and he doesn't see climate change occurring in his lifetime, and so he doesn't care, right? But having said that, he is being very effective, declaring an energy emergency, right? That allows him to disregard all of the environmental regulations. It's Orwellian, by the way. Where is the emergency? We have the largest supply of energy we've ever had in the country's history. Prices are not high. There's nobody suffering from a shortage, right? The real emergency, which Joe Biden failed to declare, is the climate emergency, right? And declaring an energy emergency allows Donald Trump to pursue policies and industries to do things that will make the climate emergency genuine, accelerate its effects, and ultimately have even more catastrophic consequences. That's a George Orwell world. That's a day is night, night is day kind of world. That's the way in which Donald Trump is exercising power in this area. Rescinding the EPA's 2009 endangerment finding on greenhouse gases. Almost nobody's paying any attention to this, right? And to be as clear as possible, this hasn't been done yet, right? The executive order was to direct the EPA to reconsider whether or not under the Clean Air Act, right, part of its enabling legislation, there was a finding in 2009 when Barack Obama was president that greenhouse gases endanger human life. And therefore, the EPA, under the Clean Air Act, is entitled to regulate greenhouse gases, right? And if the EPA reverses that finding, and remember, right, the EPA has just fired its entire scientific advisory boards, right? 2 different boards completely vacated, right? Again, there's just so much going on, it's hard to know what to pay attention to, but I would suggest this is something to really pay attention to because its long-term consequences are so dangerous. And then, by the way, deregulating AI and encouraging crypto. And I do think there's a kind of cowboy capitalism dimension to this. This is the future. America needs to be America first, nationalistic, and promoting dominance in this area. But I also think there's a really important energy subtext to this. And I will note the complexity. I'm teaching a whole class on this at Sarah Lawrence, and so I'm learning a lot about this right now. But that there's a real worry among economists, especially people who study the carbon-based sector of our economy, the fossil fuel sector of our economy, that this economy is in decline. This portion of our economy is in decline. That people prefer electric vehicles, that people are getting smart about energy saving devices in their homes, that it's actually now more efficient to make electricity using sun and wind than it is using natural gas or coal, right? And that the issue here is that we have very large, very profitable corporations that have invested billions or trillions of dollars into continuing to purchase, access the right to drill or to pump or to frack these energy sources, and that are investing in the infrastructure, in the material needed to do this, and that they may be in trouble. Now, you add to this, and I think this is a wonderful way to express this, AI, right? Right now, many of us use it without knowing we use it. We Google, right? But Google is driven by AI. There's a projection that within 5 years, most of us will be using AI directly in the way in which we use Google right now. I.e., whenever we want to figure something out, we'll ask a chatbot, personal assistant. We won't Google it anymore, right? And that the consequence of the use of AI becoming ubiquitous for most Americans is that America will need to use a lot more energy. The estimate is essentially the amount of electricity that France used in 2024. The United States will need that much more electricity by 2028 if we really fully go down the AI path. By the way, right, the executives of the AI industry, the Sam Altmans, et cetera, Elon Musk included, have gone to Washington to petition to have their industry regulated. Not because of climate change concerns, that should be part of the conversation, but much more because they're frightened about what the unchecked arms race development of this technology could do to the future of humanity. It could disempower us. We could release technology that we really don't have the capacity to control. It's not very often that an industry goes to Washington and says, please regulate us so that we don't have to engage in an arms race with our competitors. But that's what the AI industry did. And rather than figuring out how to do that productively and intelligently, this administration is deregulating. And I do think part of the reason they're deregulating is to gin up the demand for carbon-based energy, because Donald Trump recognizes that the titans of that industry probably gave his campaign $250 million, almost as much as Elon Musk spent for him, and that he wants to have their support going forward. And by the way, he thinks maybe it will help the American economy. I better stop there. But I'm trying to do the work. I hope I'm beginning to do the work to say, let's not be overwhelmed and intimidated by everything Trump is doing. Let's organize it, understand its implicit logic, and then we'll have a better sense of which aspects of this deserve our undivided attention and ultimately our resistance. That's preparatory to then figuring out what effective resistance might look like. All right, like I say, I'll stop there, but I'm sure you guys must have thoughts and questions. Who wants to start us out today?
Just
go ahead.
Outstanding.
Go ahead, Renee, and then
just an outstanding analysis. I'm really impressed. Thank you.
I'll take it. Thank you, Renee. I appreciate it. Yeah. Wilma, go ahead. You got to unmute yourself.
looking forward, I think it most likely that Trump will not consider leaving office in 4 years.
Okay. I don't agree. And I'm sorry to be so direct, but two things to start with. In terms of the actuarials, it's not clear that he'll be alive or that he'll be competent to be president 4 years from now, right? And so again, maybe he will be. And we shouldn't discount that possibility. Maybe he's got a Faustian deal with the devil, and he's has something close to Methusean longevity. Let us hope not, right? But then I'll add, I don't know that Donald Trump will be very popular 1 year or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years from now. And so, the new model of autocrats, they get elected, right? They get elected with weakened opposition and with a press that has also been defanged from the capacity to criticize them. I'm not sure that Donald Trump will actually be able to undermine the Democratic Party or completely remove the independence and the criticism of the press. He may be dominant in the right-wing media ecosystem. And I think it's worthwhile noting that in his first term, Fox News was as close as we've ever had to having a state-controlled media system. But having said that, Fox News has about a third of America, right, in its echo chamber. About 2/3 of people escape that echo chamber. And so I don't think it's capable by itself of delivering permanent popularity to Donald Trump. So I'm not convinced that Donald Trump will be a permanent, long-lived dictator in the United States.
It's not about, I don't think it's about popularity, it's about power.
Yeah.
But I hope it will.
Yeah, and I'll just say one more thing here, which is what concerns me more is whether or not J.D. Vance or whomever is Trump's successor in the MAGA movement is powerful and popular and able to continue the trajectory that Trump is on 4 years from now. I think that's the more likely scenario. And then I will just point out that Donald Trump appears to be uniquely charismatic, uniquely disinhibited, uniquely willing to do whatever he thinks. I mean, the number of lies, because what he's doing is so outrageous, I think we're paying less attention to the mendacity with which he's justifying it, right? But the all of those attributes make him, I think, a uniquely successful and uniquely dangerous force in American politics. As I started with that Tocqueville quote, I'm suggesting the idea, and I'm sorry for being too philosophical with you, but Hegel refers to a world historic figure, and he takes Napoleon to represent a world historical figure, somebody who kind of, not intellectually, but intuitively grasps their cultural moment before anybody else does, and therefore becomes very powerful. And I think, in a sense, Donald Trump better understands the dynamics of the social media system, the attention economy, the appetite for strong leadership and autocracy in times of rapid cultural change than anybody else of his generation does. I do wonder, as a result, whether J.D. Vance would be successful in assuming the mantle after Donald Trump leaves the stage. Iris, you've had your hand up for a long time. Go ahead.
Thank you.
And then Flossie, I see you. I'll come to you next.
I just
Hey.
want to call attention Some of you know, most of you do not know, Indivisible, along with Move On and a host of other groups, are organizing a Zoom meetup this Sunday at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And I want to urge all of you that might feel you have the energy to confront some of what's going on, to go online to Indivisible, February, I guess it's
Second,
what day? Second is Sunday. Thank you. And you'll get the invitation to sign up, and then you'll get the invitation beyond that to join. Please do your part. Bring on relatives, friends, whatever. This is pushback time if there ever was. Thank you.
What was it? What's the site again?
Indivisible.
Just Indivisible?
Yeah, Indivisible. It's Ezra Klein's group,
Okay.
and they will be organizing with Move On. It's just one of a number of different groups that are coming along to talk to you about pushback. And that will be this Sunday, 5 p.m. But you have to go to Indivisible to sign up to get the call letters. Please do.
and I'm
Can you put that on the list here?
trying to look for it. So if you just get to indivisible.org, there's a sign up, and then there's something about national call, join Indivisible, Move On, and Working Families Party on Sunday, February 2nd at 8 p.m. So just Google Indivisible, get to indivisible.org, and the landing page will have a lot of information for you.
That was Eastern time.
8 p.m. Eastern time, 5 p.m.
Right.
Western
Thank you.
time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Flossie, you've been waiting. Go ahead, and then David, I see you as well.
The only hope that I have is that when he gets his cabinet together, what he has as his advisors are lunatics. They're idiots. See what he is doing to the FBI. He's removing all of the people who could do his dirty work, the smartest ones. He's asking them to retire themselves. Well, many may be happy to do that. So he is being served by people who don't understand that what he really requires is to destroy, and they're destroying it by being idiots. That's what I see.
Thank you, Flossie. And I'm going to comment very quickly that I consider it to be deplorable to politicize a plane crash, right? And especially to politicize it, using DEI. And this is an effort, again, to suggest that the federal government is run on the basis of politics, ideology, and that it's left-wing woke ideology as opposed to competence. And I think we're learning a little bit more now about the fact that part of the problem is not that it was DEI, but that they were understaffed, right? And that if we then look at the effort to get a substantial portion of the federal workforce that embodies and incorporates a huge amount of training, intelligence, expertise, competence to resign, I do think that in many ways, right, the idea that you don't know what you got until it's gone, to quote Joni Mitchell, right, that if we end up draining the federal civil service of many of its most competent workers, that we will very quickly understand that this was not some left-wing woke ideological apparatus. This was stitched into the very fabric of our lives to protect our safety, our well-being, our economy, our environment, and Yes. So the damage that could be done to the civil service. It's funny. I'm going to plug in. We're going longer than I thought we were going to go. So give me 2 seconds. John started our conversation today by talking about Hitler and Mussolini, or the authoritarian, the rise of a kind of autocracy in Japan, all in the first half of the 20th century. There's this revisionary historical literature on Nazi Germany that basically says, look, if the Allies would not have defeated Hitler, probably that regime would have crumbled from its own incompetence within 5 years, right? Part of the problem with the Führer principle, with the idea of putting all decisions in the hands of a single strong popular leader, is that that person almost inevitably does not have all the knowledge, all the expertise to make good decisions about all the things that need managing in a complex society. There's a reason we have a civil service, a bureaucracy, an administrative state, and that is because our society is so complex. We need to incorporate the competence of experts. And one of the things I haven't fully said yet about the Trump administration is its deep mistrust and hostility toward expertise, right? And
Yes.
Hannah Arendt has this wonderful line in which she says, it doesn't matter how powerful you are, you still can't force the three angles of a triangle to be at anything other than 180 degrees, right?
Yeah.
And the idea that knowledge resists power, right? And that in particular, Donald Trump is still really frustrated that he lost the 2020 election, in part because a pandemic broke out, and in part because what was required to manage the pandemic was incompatible with him continuing to do what he wanted to do with the economy. And he doesn't want to be in that position again. He doesn't want to have experts telling him what he can and can't do. And I think he will very likely pay the cost of having purged expertise from his cabinet, right? RFK, my God. And from the people who work beneath the cabinet officials, right? So yes, I completely agree with you, Flossie. And then there's a question, right? This bites us, does it bite him? And I just want to emphasize that refrain and to say, look, we live in a different reality. We don't live in a world where automatically the failure of a leader exposes to their followers their incompetence and their disqualification. We live in the world of social media. We live in the world of partisan polarization. We live in the world of scapegoating. There's a possible outcome to all of this in which we suffer greatly and Donald Trump skates away. I think we have to be organized. Thank you for calling our attention, Iris, to this meeting, because I do think, that part of the question will be, will these resistance organizations actually do the work we need done of organizing us to begin to hold Donald Trump accountable, his administration accountable, his party accountable, when they crash and burn things, as inevitably they will do.
David, you remember the phrase around political science that
Right.
Republicans believe government is bad, and when in office, they do everything they can to prove it.
Yes, exactly. And thank you for that, John, because I do think, right, one of the potential upshots here will be exactly that as government starts to fail, it will be a call to defund government. And there's so much to talk about here, with interest rates going up, with Donald Trump trying to make his 2017 tax cuts permanent. The national debt is swelling. Will we be able to afford our government in 4 years if we continue down this path? David, go ahead.
Did I
Well,
say-
I wanted to go back to the point that John made at the beginning about it may already be too late
individual and
to
move
undo
on
the damage.
and a bunch
And
of
to
work.
the point that Wilma made in response to your comment, where she said that it may not be popularity, it may be power that that can't be undone. He can become unpopular, but will he be so entrenched and so in control of things that we can't get him out? And John also mentioned the parallels with Italy. What about the parallels with Argentina and Brazil and Venezuela and Peru? Those seem to me to be countries where they do swing back and forth, but they never swing back enough in the democracy camp. And I think its institutions aren't stable enough to prevent takeover again by tyrants and dictators and the like. And so I worry that that Trump may not need um, popularity in order to maintain power, the way that it happens in Venezuela is the most, I think, dramatic current example, where basically the guy in power just said the election was a farce and assumed control over it.
Yeah.
And I've been every month I look for new quotes to put in my email that relate to what we're dealing with. And this month I looked for ones on liberty, tyranny rather. And I found two that I think are relevant. The first one is by Thomas Jefferson. It says, when governments fear the people, there is liberty. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny. And the one that I find really scary is this one by Montesquieu. There is no greater tyranny than that which is perpetuated under the shield of law and in the name of justice. And it seems to me that that's what Trump is trying to do.
Yeah, I'm wondering about the translation of the Montesquieu. I think that I just know he preferred despotism to tyranny. But anyway, having said that, so I'll say a couple of things quickly. One of them I hope somewhat reassuring, and that is let us hope. Let us spend a little bit of time contemplating, the strength of American civil society, the strength of our institutions, the longevity and the degree to which, at least half of the population seems to deeply value the institutions that sustain aspects of liberty, of freedom, of equality as well, of the capacity to express our dissent. I mean, look, here we are having this meeting, right? And so I think we have to be careful not to say, the path to authoritarianism is wide open. I think there's actually a lot of bumps on the road before you get there in the United States. But having said that, I also then want to add very quickly that part of what I'm suggesting is that it's the civil and political culture of the United States that is the strongest impediment to remember, right? Italy, Germany, Japan, Spain. These were very young democracies with very fragile institutions and very weak liberal political cultures were not there, right? But having said that, that's relying on culture, and culture is only sustained when people continue to believe what makes culture. It has to be animated by us. It's not an institution, right? The same is really true of even political institutions, right? The dramatic collapse of the Soviet Union shows that the apparently strong state can really be a house of cards when the people no longer believe that its institutions are worth defending. But having said that, that gives me hope as well as fear. That there are enough people in this country who still value our institutions that it's going to be more difficult to topple them than it was in all of these historical cases, whether it's Venezuela or Hungary or Poland or Russia or the fascist cases of the first half of the 20th century.
You're here.
Let's hope.
Yeah,
All right, everybody. We went for a
I-
long time today. I think I better wrap it up. Hour and a half. Wonderful being with you. Really good conversation. Thank you for starting us out, John. I want to be as clear as possible. I welcome you guys to present ideas when you want to present ideas as well. So let's hope that's a precedent and we can keep doing that. I will see everybody next week. Have good weeks. Be well. We'll keep doing the work of figuring out wheat and chaff and what we need to be focusing on. And who knows, maybe some of you will be on that meeting Sunday evening as well. Take care, everybody. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, guys. Take care.